Today is 14th February, Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is a day to celebrate love, and we are here to celebrate the love of screenwriting, I think. Okay, on this note, I'm going to introduce Mr. Mitesh Shah. He's one of the writers of Tumbad. He has also written Helicopter Ella. He's a screenwriter. He's a producer. And most important, he is the convener of this Indian Screenwriters Conference 2025. So a big round of applause for Mr. Mitesh Shah, and I request Mr. Mitesh Shah to come on stage and do the honors. Thank you.
Hello everyone, good to see you all. To start this conference, I'll just invite the President of SWA, Ms. Preeti Mamgen, to please come on stage. Preeti ji is a screenwriter, please. Preeti ji is an actor. She's a screenwriter among many other things. Now I'll invite Mr. Zama Habib, the General Secretary of SWA, to please grace the stage. Zama is an actor, is a director, screenwriter, and producer. Please. And then I'll invite our chief guest, Mr. Christopher Kaiser. Chris is the ex-president of the WGA, and he's one of the chief negotiators of the very successful WGA strike last year. He's come all the way from his home country to talk to us, to share his experiences. Please, Chris, please come on stage. Thank you. So with this, I'll begin. I wanted to talk about the huddle, जो हम जमावड़ा कहते हैं, अड्डा, जो हम साथ मिलते हैं, बैठते हैं, खाना खाते हैं और कहानियाँ सुनाते हैं. There is something about a huddle. Humans have been doing this forever, huddling together when we need each other, when we are cold and frightened, and then when we are happy and celebrating. We love watching our favorite sports teams huddle together pre-match, pushing each other, teaming up, planning, strategizing. We huddle as families in terms of crisis, in terms of celebrations, during weddings, friends huddling when we need each other. We gather around the comforting fire, and what do? We tell stories. Through our words, through dance, through silence, and through song. And what are these stories? It started off maybe as a simple passing of information, telling your tribe about a wild animal you encountered, and then a story about how you survived an attack, about a fruit you discovered and a new person you met. That is how a community survives. That is how we thrive, by sharing our stories. By passing our experiences, it allays our fears, it relays hope. Stories helped us pass on information and document them for long-term use, from information dissemination to survival guides, to living meaningfully, finding deeper truths, to empathize, to live, and then pass it on. The following 3 days, we are going to talk about this. On-screen mediums have always been very resource-heavy. Not everyone had a way in, but new models emerged. What was a privilege of the few has become accessible to many. Anyone with a phone and internet access has the opportunity to document their expression and many, many platforms to share it. Our tools to write our stories became sharper. The devices to document them have become better. However, the spans of attention have considerably gone down. The way stories are told is therefore changing. The way these stories are consumed is evolving. Has the reality changed? It has, as it always will. New realities will keep emerging, they'll keep evolving, and we'll all keep matching up. We'll update and we'll adapt. And that's our theme for this year, the 7th edition of the conference, the new reality. And we intend to set some context right. The Indian Screenwriters Conference has always been a think tank between peers to interact with those who have raged the storm and those who have traversed to the other side, beaten, prevailed, and experienced. Where are the writers winning? Where are they failing? And how are they course correcting? The aim of the conference this year is to dispel some fears and myths around what the future of screenwriting and storytelling could look like. The aim is to lend some actionable inputs and tools to tell those stories better. We have some exciting panels and some very cool masterclasses this year to dispense resources on how some creators have honed their craft. The reality is changing faster than ever. Alternative realities are emerging. So what do? We do the same thing that we have done for centuries. We huddle, we come together, we sit together and we share Oh, this is how I navigated the storm. Oh, this is how I realized my dream. This is how I found love. This is how I managed a heartbreak. Take this story, take this song. It helped me, it might help you. And then go make it this your own. And then create one more. With this, I flag off the 7th edition of the Indian Screenwriters Conference. Some of us might have some answers at the end of these 3 days. Some of us might have better questions. Welcome all. Welcome to the huddle, our very own Jamauda. Like most of you here, I have come curious and wish to leave with a little more insight, to learn, unlearn, to write, and to rewrite. Thank you. Thank you very much. With this, I flag off the conference. I would request Preeti ji to please come to the mic and say a few words.
Good morning. Okay, I was scared that I might not reach the mic, but I think that's fine. So, किसी ने मुझसे कहा एक बार कि यार तुम राइटर्स हमेशा ही रोते रहते हो कि काम नहीं है, काम है तो अच्छा काम नहीं है, अच्छा है पर पैसे नहीं है, पैसे हैं तो मिलते नहीं हैं. यू ऑलवेज क्राइंग, यू नो. डायरेक्टर ने मेरी स्क्रिप्ट का पता नहीं क्या हाल कर दिया, क्या लिखा था क्या बना दिया. This got me thinking that when we first started writing, there was so much enthusiasm, ideas would flow, and there was so much joy in writing. But when it becomes a job, sometimes we lose the joy of writing. भूल जाते हैं कि we do this, we came here to do this because we love the craft. Alfred Hitchcock said, to make a great film, you need 3 things: the script, the script, the script. Any great content in any medium, in fact, starts in the heart, in the mind, and the skill of the writer. So for these 3 days, I want you all to forget everything. Let's not think of kya nahi hai, kaam nahi hai, acha nahi hai, all of our woes. And let's celebrate the craft of screenwriting. Let's learn and discuss. Let's get inspired by our comrades. And let's feel that joy of writing once again. इलाहाबाद के कवि वसीम बरेलवी, जिनकी मैं अभी एक वो अटेंड करके आई, इट वाज लाइक अ सम्मेलन इन इलाहाबाद, एंड ही सेड दीज ब्यूटिफुल लाइन्स: तुम आ गए हो तो कुछ चांदनी सी बातें हो, ज़मीं पे चांद कहाँ रोज़ रोज़ उतरता है. So let's really enjoy this and let's enrich ourselves and our craft. Thank you.
I'll now invite Mr. Zama Habib to please take the mic.
थैंक यू. सब बातें हो चुकी हैं और मुझे कुछ कहने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. बेसिकली हम जिस पड़ाव पे अभी हैं और जिस तरह की कहानियां बन रही हैं, आज आप 3 दिन जो भी सुनेंगे उससे आप कुछ लेके जाएंगे. रिमेंबर वन थिंग: a weak society consumes violence as entertainment. A deprived society consumes what? It consumes patriotism as entertainment. An unhappy society consumes obscene jokes as entertainment, which you are seeing around. We are not here just to entertain. We are here to shape the society. We have a lineup of finest minds. Please hear them out, ponder over, and let us decide what is our new reality and what to do, how to shape the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Preeti ji. Thank you, Zama bhai. I'll now request Preeti ji to please present Chris with a souvenir and invite him to India. Thank you so much. Please take the prime. As we start the first session, I would invite Mr. Anjum Rajabali, who we all know needs no introduction. He's steered the Screenwriters Association since 2008 and has brought it to where it is right now. Uh, like I said, doesn't need any more introduction. Anjum, please come. Please grace the stage. Thank you. And we start the first session.
I was just telling Chris that it is so wonderful that even on a Friday morning, this is a substantial crowd. Okay, and gradually we do expect that the hall will start to fill up because registrations have been quite numerous, more than this. So Chris, once again, for the nth time, welcome to India and personal gratitude on behalf of SWA and on behalf of the entire community which is here in front of you for you having taken the trouble to come and be with us, speak with us. देखिए हैं अमेरिका से ऑब्वियसली तो हिंदी नहीं जानते हैं तो इसलिए इनके साथ जब बात होगी शुरू अभी तो वो अंग्रेजी में ही होगी पर जहाँ जहाँ ज़रूरत पड़े और जहाँ मुझे लगे कि भैया थोड़ा सा कुछ उनको ट्रांसलेट करना आवश्यक है ज़रूरी है तो वो मैं करते जाऊँगा समय कम है so let's just dive into this. What is important about Chris's presence here is as follows. There's no doubt, I mean, he's a very successful, very well-respected and what we say eminent Hollywood screenwriter and a lot of you have seen his work, our students definitely have and have admired it. And about that craft, about him as a writer and his technique, Saivin Quadras, our colleague here from the EC, will be speaking with him tomorrow. Today, I'm going to speak with him about him as a leader of a guild, the leader of the trade union of screenwriters in Hollywood. And the kind of work that he has done, what is it that he has learned from that, and what is it that we can learn from that learning. तो वो फोकस थोड़ा उसके ऊपर होगा, उसके जो तजुर्बे जो रहे हैं, उसमें से हम यहाँ क्या सीख सकते हैं. Because SWA, as you know, को वक्त लग रहा है to consolidate, to acquire a certain kind of organizational strength, जहाँ हम actually आमने सामने producers को बुला के negotiate कर सके collectively for our rights. और वो प्रथा, वो process जो है वो चालू हो चुका है. लेकिन उसको थोड़ा सा और boost करने के लिए और धक्का लगाने के लिए I think ये जो बातचीत जो होगी वो बेहद काम आएगी. Okay. So Chris was the president of the Writers Guild of America. The Writers Guild of America West is clearly the most powerful creative union in the world. Not just the most powerful screenwriting union, but in all, sort of if you look at all the film and every kind of creative industry, उनके unions में ये सबसे शक्तिशाली रहे हैं, Writers Guild of America. Chris was the president from 2011 to 2015, 2 consecutive terms. He was also a participant and one of the leaders of the WGA strike in 2007-2008, which also proved to be successful कि जहाँ इंटरनेट की बातें आने लगी थी और WGA जो बहुत ही मतलब इंटेलिजेंट यूनियन भी है, उन्होंने समझ लिया था कि अगर इंटरनेट के ऊपर जो ये लोग डालेंगे हमारा काम और उसमें से अगर हमारे को हमारा हिस्सा नहीं मिलेगा और आज अगर हम नहीं लड़ेंगे तो ये बहुत बड़ा हो जाने वाला है and then we will get left out of that. And there is no doubt the corporations, they fought tooth and nail, but the WGA stuck to its guns and they finally managed to arrest that and thank God for that because that became a model now for the rest of the unions in the world to follow. फिर उसके बाद in 2023 again the corporations, Netflix, Amazon, all these platforms as you know have become very, very strong and very powerful and therefore also very arrogant, unfortunately, by default. And as a result of which they dug in their heels and in the 3-year negotiation which these people have every 3 years on what they call the minimum basic agreement, कि basic जो हक जो है writers के वो ये दोनों parties के बीच में collectively agree हो जाए. तो MPTP है एक संस्था which represents all the leading corporations. I think about 720 of them. Yeah, I think it's about 720 are signatories to your MBA. And इस तरफ से the Writers Guild of America which represents the all the writers, Hollywood screenwriters. तो वो agreement breakdown हो गया उसका. उन्होंने कहा हम ये मानने को तैयार ही नहीं है. हम आपको entertain ही नहीं करेंगे. जो बिल्कुल जाहिर है कि आप वाकिफ हो इस fact से कि that's how they behave. The bigger they get, the less they want to value us and squeeze us, because they can. These people dug in their heels and there was a strike which went on for roughly 5 months. The negotiations were the critical part. Okay, who will be able to get them to agree to the reasonable terms that WJ was offering? And there were 2 chief negotiators who were leading this consistently. And one of them was Chris Kaiser. So that is the importance of Chris Kaiser, that he was one of the 2 who managed to make the strike successful. And that's how you are important for us. Okay?
I would give all the credit to the membership, but thank you.
Yeah. See, membership is, without the membership, there's nothing. But in the membership, you need unity. And we're going to come to that. Because all you people, I imagine, are members of SWA. Where is it that you come in to make the union strong so that the union can be able to negotiate strongly such that then your benefits increase. You get your due rights. So this is where it starts with you. Without your unity, without your collective strength, SWA is zero. I assure you that. And I have faced that because, like Chris, I've also been the chief negotiator for SWA for a while now. And I know the difficulties that I face. And I know the power that I can get at the table when I can, with assurance, tell them that all these people have been informed of what it is that we are here to negotiate. And they are all with us. So don't take a chance with me, because you're taking a chance with this entire membership. All these writers without whom you have zero industry. And that's what we need to talk about. So, okay, what is it that makes Writers Guild of America the most powerful creative union in the world?
I would say that the key to it is, and we'll talk about this in much more detail, it's member solidarity in support of a trade union that is willing to exercise its power from time to time when that's necessary. In other words, among all the Hollywood unions, we strike when we need to. We don't strike willy-nilly. We don't strike for anything less than an existential crisis in the lives of writers, because we understand the cost of a strike. But we have, over the course of our history, struck a number of times. And as you talked about, really very importantly recently in 2007, 2008, and in 2023. And a union that does not periodically exercise its power does not have the power it could have. It is not fully exploiting the value of its membership.
And there you are. It is about a balance of power. It is about who is able to actually push hard with the conviction that we have our people behind us. So would you say, therefore, unity, when you use the word solidarity, I'm using the word unity again, that the members are unified behind the trade union, and that is what gives the trade union the power, actually, to...
Yes, I mean, and the conversation is more complicated than that in this sense, and we're going to get into this. The WGA has not always had uniform solidarity. The process of the membership trusting the leadership, and the leadership trusting the membership, and the members trusting each other and understanding what they're there to do in a given moment, that comes from years and years of preparation, of exerting power in smaller ways. We can talk about all of that. It is a state of mind and a muscle that needs to be exercised and reinforced over time. Because when push comes to shove and you have to ask your members to strike for 5 months, for example, as we did, the emotional and the economic cost is very high. It's very high for people whose careers may not be as long as other careers, who all have their own personal economies and come to it a moment that they may not feel is going to come again in their careers, a moment of extraordinary success, or at the brink of success. You need everybody to understand why they're there and what their purpose is. And that happens over a very long, extended period of time with deliberate education and ongoing communication inside a guild. And we should talk about all of those things. But I just want to be really clear about that. You know, some organizations, for example, like SAG-AFTRA, when they struck in 2023, struck in large part on emotion, right? We struck on preparation. And our preparation paved the way for SAG-AFTRA that was also using its emotion. This is not denigrating SAG-AFTRA. They did an incredible job and they changed the game for us and they have in the past. But we're writers, right? So like we're keeping, we're making a structure and we're figuring it out and we understand the arguments. We do all of those things. That's the way we work. We're neurotic, right? We over-prepare, and we over-prepared for this over the course of more than at least a decade. So, and when I come here and we talk about what it means to exert your power eventually, to understand what that power is, I understand that I'm coming from a different industry. We have different rights. We have many advantages. We have different issues, although many of them overlap. I don't presume to understand what it means to say to any of you that you need to be brave in the face of what the companies are asking you to do. I'm only saying that the process of actually finding your own power is a long and arduous process of beginning to trust each other and believe in yourself.
जब ये जिक्र कर रहे हैं SAG-AFTRA, that is the Screen Actors Guild, जो 2023 में जो इनकी पहले हड़ताल शुरू हुई मई महीने में, when the negotiations broke down, क्योंकि deadline आ गई थी for the next term of the new minimum basic agreement to begin. तो क्योंकि तब तक agreement नहीं हुआ था दो parties के बीच में, तो इन्होंने हड़ताल declare की, and then of course later on the Screen Actors Guild also joined them. अब ये जो बात कर रहे हैं communication, that communication between the union and its members, और इस मामले में I think SWA जो है, union जो है आपका, this is a lesson even for us, and that's why we are also listening very closely to what Chris is saying about that. It's through the communication, constant communication, that trust is built between the membership and the leadership. Leadership being the executive committee, which you people elect every 2 years. ये होने पर एक ट्रस्ट बनता है और वो ट्रस्ट को लेके फिर फैसले लिए जा सकते हैं जो कलेक्टिव एक्शन के लिए है, क्योंकि it is a sacrifice. One thing which Chris told me yesterday in I think a private conversation that you and I had.
I thought that was private.
This is the before the recording took place. That there was a strike, I think somewhere in the 80s you said, where actually the successful senior writers gave up certain benefits to be able to get benefits which would go long term, which means for the future, which means for the new generation which was to come. So they made a sacrifice. They gave up their remuneration, their additional. You remember that? You were telling me that yesterday.
I remember, yes. It's
Yeah,
a true story. It's not the 80s. And you should pay better attention. But I'm kidding. So do you want me to, do you want me to go directly to that, or should we do a short history of the WGA to give you a sense of what's all going on? You tell me.
No, that. But yeah, we'll do a short history because yesterday we had far more time during the podcast. Today we have slightly lesser time.
Infinitesimally short history of the
please.
WGA.
Yeah,
I mean, we have 100 years of history of this. There was a precursor to the WGA called the Screenwriters Guild that in the 1920s and the 1930s fought for copyright and credits and all of those things. The guild itself was formed in the 1950s and took over from that. In the early part of its history, the 1960s, it had strikes. It worked off of a minimum basic agreement, by the way, that was first negotiated in the 1930s. And by the 1960s, the guild was relatively strong. It had a period of really expanding the rights of writers. In 1960, famously for us, the guild struck alongside SAG-AFTRA. And in that strike, we won for the first time residuals for the reuse of our material in a consistent way, and also a pension plan and a part of an industry-wide health plan. And that didn't come without a cost. That's what Anjum's talking about. The very famous television writers of the time who had written all the shows that you may have heard of if you are a student of American television, Lucy, the Honeymooners, all of those, they gave up all of their rights in perpetuity to the value of everything they had made in exchange for everyone from that point on getting residuals and for what they did.
Explain the residuals thing.
Okay.
ये हम लोग जो यहाँ रॉयल्टी बोलते हैं कि सिनेमा हॉल के बाहर जब हमारा काम दिखाया जाए, जो अभी कानून बन के आया है और आपको पता होगा कि अभी कॉपीराइट सोसाइटी रजिस्टर हुई है, अब उनका यह है कि यूनियन में ही वो लोग नेगोशिएट करके लेते हैं, बिकॉज उनका कानून ऐसा नहीं है कि जहां उनको रॉयल्टीज मिलती हैं. सो दे कॉल इट रेजिड्यूअल्स, कि उनका काम जब टेलीविजन पे या प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे या ऐसे कहीं बाहर सिनेमा घर के बाहर दिखाया जाता है तो उसमें से एक हिस्सा इनको मिलना चाहिए. सो द यूनियन हैज मैनेज टू गेट दैट फॉर हिम. तो वो जो कह रहे हैं कि उस वक्त जो सक्सेसफुल शोज के जो लेखक थे उन्होंने कहा ठीक है, हम लोग ये जो है हमको जो मिलने वाला है इसके अंदर से हम छोड़ देते हैं, लेकिन ये रेजिड्यूल्स की प्रथा जो है वो शुरू रहे, बिकॉज ये कायम रूप से अगर रहेगी तो आगे के जनरेशन्स जो आते जाएंगे उनको ये फायदा होगा, भले हम ये नुकसान सहन करें. दैट्स व्हाट ही इज रेफरिंग टू. थैंक यू. प्लीज.
I have no idea if that's right or wrong, but I'll trust you that you're right.
Okay, go on now, please.
Anyway, in the early 60s and through the early 70s, the Guild was very successful in making major strides in the contract. But that power waned somewhat, and by the 80s into the 90s, the Guild was less powerful, and some of its strikes were not as successful. Some of them had been undermined by the elite members of the union who believed that they were better off getting back to work. And so, like all guilds, we had ups and downs. We were a relatively quiet union in the early 2000s, leading up to 2007 and 8, when a new leadership came in, and the strike of 2007 and 8 happened, which was an enormously risky thing. I mean, we were striking for jurisdiction, which means we could apply terms, minimum terms, to stuff that was made for the internet at a point when no one was working for anything that was distributed on the internet. So we understood, we looked into the future and said, this is the future of how writing is going to be distributed. If we don't have control over that, we are going to be in big trouble, because the companies are going to very quickly say, your minimums don't apply, your health and pension fund doesn't apply, your residuals, your reuse payments don't apply. And so the Guild was able to hold together for 100 days and strike to win jurisdiction over new media. Enormous victory, but pretty important. We lost the public relations war after that. Writers began to believe that the strike might have been a mistake. They did that because, one, they weren't getting paid yet for the internet, so they had, for work on the internet, it was a little too early. Although, by the way, the day the strike settled, the companies launched Hulu. So they knew full well what was coming. But writers who aren't seeing that yet, so that's one thing. Second thing is the Great Recession happened right afterward, so everyone was in big trouble economically after that. And the third thing was the companies do what the companies always do, which they began to put out a message that says, well, you went on strike, and everything bad that's happening to you happened because of the strike. You are paying for your own hubris. You're paying for the fact that you fought back. And that was pretty successful for a while. The Guild was very divided for a while. And it took us, well, 2008 to 2023, 15 years until we were ready to exercise our strike threat again. But in that period, I hope I'm not going on too long, in that period, we began to educate the membership once again about what it means to be a powerful, effective trade union. So, for example, in 2017, we took what's called a strike authorization vote, where we go to the membership and say, we're about to negotiate with the companies. If it goes well, that's great. But if they don't give us what we need, if we get to expiration and we feel that what has been offered to us is insufficient to allow you to continue to work in the business, then we want you beforehand to tell us we're allowed to go on strike. So that's a very risky thing for a membership to say yes to. It's not a thing that the Guild was used to doing up to that point over and over again. And we got an overwhelming strike authorization vote approval. We then negotiated on the basis of that, and we didn't strike. But we had begun to teach the membership what it meant to have power. And then, a couple of years after that, we launched what was called the agency campaign, where I want to go into great detail, but the point is, for 2 years, every single writer in the business fired their agents, their only friend, so-called, in the business, because we knew that the agents were conflicted. There was conflict of interest on the part of the agencies, and we needed to fix it. And no one thought we could win that battle. We took on CAA and WME and all the enormous agencies. They held complete control over the business. They held control over us, so much so that we essentially were working for them instead of the other way around. So no one thought we could do it, but we held together for 2 years. People kept working, but they worked without any representation. And at the end of those 2 years, every single agency in Hollywood acceded to every single one of our demands. We won. And that was enormously important. So in 2023, when the business was in desperate shape, when the treatment of writers was so bad that it wasn't possible to be successful and still have a career that gave you the amount of income to survive. When we went back to writers and said, let's do it again, they were ready. They understood what they could do together. They had spent 10 years exercising that muscle in smaller ways, and they were ready to exercise it in a big way. So that's a very brief history of how we got to 2023. There are a bunch of other things that happened inside the Guild that gave us the power, and then we can talk about the strike itself. But my message here is the same over and over and over again. It's preparation, communication, and eventually leading to unity and understanding of your own power.
Absolutely, Chris. Absolutely. And WGA really, in this particular strike, I think, it was, I would say, handled in a way which is a model for the rest of the writers' unions across the world, including SWA, to emulate. And we've had a lot of discussions with Michel. I had, I think, a 2-hour-long meeting about how they went about preparing the whole captain system and the organization, yes. Now, I want to understand one thing. See, one of the fears that Indian writers have, successful writers, working writers, that it's a relationship-based industry, that I've worked with this producer for so long. Every time he announces a new project, he approaches me to write that. Now, I go on strike, I don't want to alienate him, okay, that I've joined the Hartalis, and here, there's a certain, unions have become obviously a bad word for corporations, including in the film industry. Now, the same thing must be applying to Hollywood. The strike that you did, again, I'm referring to a small conversation that we had yesterday. You went on. And yet, after the strike, there seemed to be no resentment, there was no acrimony between those which caused ruptures in those very relationships. And they went back to working because they recognized that this was not an individual striking against an individual. It was a union striking against a union. So you want to talk a little bit about that, about this particular anxiety, because that seems to be an anxiety here.
Yes, I'll say a couple of things about it. The first thing is, well, that's the beauty of collective action. That's why there is a guild or a union. It's true anytime an individual writer has a grievance against a company, that the guild does it for them. And it often does that in conjunction with many other grievances at the same time. Everyone's worried about their relationship with the people who employ them. And one of the ways you protect yourself is to gather in a group of 8,000 people in our case, well, 11,000, but 8,000 active members, and say, what are you going to do, punish all of us? So that's the first thing you do. You protect yourself by banding together. The second thing is, there's not a single struggle in any arena, whether it's labor or politics or what have you, where there isn't a risk that being brave might lead to some negative consequence, backlash or a loss of income or whatever it is. Never. There's no such thing. The problem is, what you need to inculcate in people, what they need to believe, is that that is a disempowering fear, a fear that leaves you unable to protect yourself and to ensure any of your basic rights. It's the fear that companies use all the time. If you dare to say something, if you speak up, if you ask for more, you will be punished for it. And those who believe it end up with nothing. There's a famous Frederick Douglass quote that I end up not using very much because it's about the fight against slavery, but which essentially says the limits of the oppression are determined by the behavior of the oppressed. That those who oppress will go as far as you let them go until you say no. And so one of the things that goes on in a strike, and we can talk about this also, is we do everything together, we meet together, we talk together, we march together, because together breeds bravery. It breeds an ability to say in unison what you cannot say by yourself. And even that takes a lot of learning. And not everyone is okay with it. There's no such thing as unanimity. We didn't have 8,000 people screaming just as loudly as everyone else, but we had almost everyone screaming just loud enough. And it's a really difficult process. I sort of am in love with the membership of the Writers Guild. and with writers in general. I mean, I always liked writers, obviously, for lots of different reasons. But the bravery that writers show inherently, the ability of writers to see a better world, to imagine what might be, and then make that happen, which is part and parcel of the work that we do. Our ability to analyze what is moral and right and good and say we're going to stand for some things, but not put up with something else. That shows itself all the time. I mean, it plays against all of our other tendencies to be somewhat insecure and neurotic and think that we could be wrong and that everyone else is, more powerful and more successful than we are. And the companies are going to play on all of those things. But in the end, the writers of the Writers Guild of America are no different from any of you or anyone else in any other country. We have a lot of advantages because of our laws, or we did, at least, I hope we'll continue to. But we really struggle with the same things everyone does, with the sense of our own dignity and what it means to fight for it and how much we can risk in doing it. So that's an education as well. But as it turns out in the end, people didn't get punished, and they didn't get punished for the same reason we made the argument over and over again. During the strike, they would say, well, you go on strike, and we're going to start using, stuff we're going to do reruns, and we're going to put on the air reality shows. We're going to do all kinds of, we're going to hire non-professional writers, which they're not allowed to do anyway. And of course, they didn't do that, because if they could have done that, they would have done that 50 years ago and saved a lot of money and put us all out of work. But the problem is they can't do anything without us. They don't do anything without us. Nothing happens until we write. No one can write as well as we can. No one can make them billions the way we can do it. And so when the strike is over, they come back to us because there is no one else to go to but us. There is no way around us. And that, by the way, is the single most important thing we said to writers during the strike, which is there is no way around you. If you stop working, if you will not write, they cannot run their businesses. You have to believe in that truth. Eventually, everything will shut down because it all begins with you. And eventually, if you can last through the pain, if you have the wherewithal to believe in yourself and each other, they will come back because there is nowhere else to go but you. And that turned out to be the truth.
There is a very important reason why I emphasized this point. There are dozens of cases that I personally come across, and SWA as a body must be receiving many more, where a young writer who right up front, when she is being hired, is told that yes, you will write the script. Okay. Later on, if there is a little bit of doctoring to be done, we're going to bring in a senior writer to do that. Okay. But you will not get writing credit. You will be assistant credit or a researcher or associate. And a lot of you are nodding here because you've been through this, you're aware of this. And the reason they don't protest is because they say, okay, no, I will get blacklisted. I will be regarded as a troublemaker. When I become successful, then I will be able to ask for leverage. Now, as an individual, you feel disempowered. But what Chris is emphasizing here, that if there's a collective action here, that through our minimum basic contract, where we are emphasizing credit, that if you write, you get credit. Matlab, kaam se naam hoga. Naam se naam nahi hota. Just because you're an eminent writer doesn't mean that your credit is guaranteed. Aapke kaam ke basis pe aapko milega, aap bada ho, chota ho. It doesn't matter. Ye agar हम लोग अग्री करके ये अगर पास करवाते हैं जो हम लोग करने जा रहे हैं, एंड इफ ऑल ऑफ यू पीपल आर अलाइंड टू दैट, तो अगर एक जो है नया राइटर बोल देता है कि नहीं, क्रेडिट के बिना मैं नहीं लिखूंगी, एंड नोबडी एल्स देन अग्रीज टू दैट, देन इन विच केस द कंपनी इज फोर्स्ड टू सॉर्ट ऑफ एंश्योर दैट काम से आपको आपका क्रेडिट मिलेगा, चाहे आप बड़े राइटर हो, छोटे राइटर हो, including the big writers. They also need to understand this, that merely because they are successful and have a name, it doesn't mean that on the basis of their biodata they can actually get higher credit. It's on the basis of the work that you have done. Now, this is what we are desperately trying to enforce here. But for that, the cooperation, even of the new writers, becomes very important. Will there be a risk that you are taking that the producer might get angry and say, I will never hire you again? Yeah, that's a risk that you are taking. But if your work is good, as a result of which they have hired you, then as Chris is saying, that without that work, they can't go ahead. So it becomes important. Number two thing is that the writer can say that this is not my rule. I might personally be even happy to accept this, but the union forbids me, and I'm a member of the union, and by becoming a member of the union, well, I'm sorry, I'm obliged to follow what their decisions have been. So I can't do anything about it. None of the writers can do anything about it because we have agreed to this minimum basic contract. That is the stage that we are on the cusp of right now. That is the stage that they have already reached, which is why they're able to exercise that. Once again, unity.
Can I say something about that? We're not special. We're not different from anybody else. We have the same problems with our writers that you're talking about. So I'll give you an example of that. One of the great abuses in, maybe it's true for in this industry as well, that screenwriters face is free rewrites. Companies saying, I know you're only contracted for a certain number of steps, an original, first draft, a revision, and a polish, but we're going to ask you to keep writing, and we're not going to pay you any more. And we're going to do that because we're going to say to you, if you don't say yes to that, of course, we're going to hire somebody else. And what's the point of that? You've been working on this script for a year, and why would you want to walk away from it? So you'll keep working for us for free. Now, that's not okay under the NBA, right? That is illegal under our minimum basic agreement. And we go to writers all the time and say, let us fight back for you. And those individual writers, almost always in the past, have said, no, leave me alone. I know that's true. I know I'm not allowed to do that, but it's very hard right now in the screenwriting business. There are more writers than there are jobs. I can't afford to be good right now. I would prefer to be paid for everything, but I can't afford to do that. That's a really consistent problem. And it's a big problem because the ability for us to enforce the NBA with regard to free rewrites is often a one-off situation. We can try to talk to the companies in general about how often they're doing it, but when we complain on the basis of an individual writer's problems, the writer is identified. So we run into the same problem you're talking about all the time. The strike, of course, is a collective action, and it's just an example of how when you come together, you feel protected. But I don't want anyone to think that we did what we did in 2023 or in 2007 and 2008 because our writers are different fundamentally in the way they think about the world and how they protect themselves. Everyone's just as afraid as anyone else in the world. They're just as nervous about losing their jobs. The industries are different. They compensate in different ways, and I'm not saying everything's exactly the same, but it's tough in the United States, and people's natural tendency is to say to the Guild on a lot of things, I get it. You'll take care of me. Please go away. Please stop saying that. I don't want to be protected. I just want to keep my job. So when we do what we do it by overcoming that, not because we don't feel it.
Yeah, true. But I'm just saying that writers are the same, their fears, anxieties are the same. I absolutely understand. Okay, this is my job, and if I don't sort of cooperate, I might lose it, and I might never be hired again by this producer. I understand. And yet, there is a difference that I do notice. That given the kind of organizational approach that WG has taken with its membership, here you are able to get your members to trust you more. That's how you went on strike. Mm-hmm. Because the members trusted you. 98.4% of those members gave you a strike authorization vote. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you have worked assiduously over years and decades to reach that stage where there is a certain cohesiveness amongst your membership and they trust their leadership. Am I right?
Yes, you're absolutely
right. As a result of which, they still have the spine to stand up and know that my guild is standing behind me. Mm-hmm. Because that's the relationship. We are at the moment on the cusp of that. We're grappling with that to ensure that our own organizational approach also evolves. Our communication becomes more frequent. Now, here, is there something relevant that you want to...
I was just like, some maybe might be helpful. I just want to read, if I can, a little bit of the rhetoric that I used with writers just to talk about how to convince them to do some of these things. Do you mind if I do that now?
No, absolutely, because we discussed that you would do that. So why would I mind here when privately I agreed?
I don't know, because you often
I'm not
are...
a two-faced person. They trust me.
Okay, all right, fine.
I don't know about you.
Yeah. I appreciate that now, and I will never doubt you again. So, I thought it might be interesting. I went to do it a couple of times just to talk about the rhetoric that we used to talk to writers, because it just helps you understand what we did. So this is just a message I put out in the middle of the strike. to membership in the middle of this. I said, we're marching for labor, and labor is watching us. We have, it turned out to be our greatest fortune, something very precious. We have a strong union in a heavily unionized industry. We have what many workers in this country do not. If we succeed, we will make it easier, not easy, but easier for others to succeed after us. If we falter, if we fail, if it is the company's power that wins the day and not ours, then we have failed for everyone. We have made it harder for everyone. I mean that not as a burden, but as a purpose. The signs we carry have messages written on them in invisible, visible ink, and all who labor can read them. That everyone who works has the right to be treated with dignity. That we are not diminished by the size of the company that employs us. That what we want is not just a gig, not just a job, but a career with a future and with promise. And that first among those promises is that if you do good work, you make a living out of doing that thing. The technology, driven only by unchecked capitalism and with no attention to its human costs and moral implications, is a threat to us all. It must be controlled. It cannot be left only to those who would always make a dollar than a good decision. And that, as I have said before, the promise of this country belongs also to those who make something other than just money. The companies think that time is weakening us, but they are wrong. It is making us stronger. Every day they refuse to negotiate. They bring us together at their gates to hear each other's stories, and in those stories to hear echoes of our own. They have reminded us every day of the thousands of other people for whom we are fighting, and reminded us too that thousands of other people are fighting for us. To paraphrase a line, we are now perhaps at the end of the beginning. No one knows how long this will take. The companies will have some say in that. What they will have no say in is how we behave along the way, in our fortitude, but they will come to understand it, and they will pay it the respect it deserves in time. So that's the kind of way I talk to people. I'll give you a few more of those over the time, but not all at once. I mean, I have one that wait. So here's one that eventually I'll read you one that I talked about when SAG-AFTRA, the actors, joined us, and something that I said to the union at the end of the strike when it was all over. But it's an example of what we're talking about. Is it an example of the way, the rhetoric that gets used to encourage people who are in pain to keep marching through that pain?
Tell me, now that we're on it, your strike went on longer than the 2007-2008 strike, because that was, I think, about 100 days, and this was close to 150, I remember, close to 5 months. There's an enormous sacrifice that writers are making because they're not being paid. And inki strike, matlab, there is no private deal. There is no, you can't even have a discussion with your director. कि नहीं ये तो project की बात हो रही है, कुछ पैसों का transaction नहीं हो रहा है. There's no writing, zero. Only then is it successful. Okay. Yeah, if you're sitting at home and writing on spec, कि भैया, I'm getting some ideas and let me just put them down. Sure, that is a separate thing. But there will be no professional work, zero to be done. Not even the producer says, अच्छा एक meeting कर लेते हैं. जब strike खत्म होगा तब ये project शुरू करेंगे. अभी बात तो कर लें थोड़ा. No, you can't have that. And they all assiduously followed that, absolutely. So there is no money coming. People who write on daily soaps and on weekly shows, 150 days, zero. Not a great time. How did you keep that going? How did you keep them motivated? What were the actions taking place which continued to reinforce their motivation?
Right.
That yes, we are onto a good thing. 150 days.
Right. I'll say a couple of things about that. The first thing is, we made an argument that was true to the membership and that they understood. I don't want to go into too much detail about the specifics for which we struck because they're not immediately parallel. But we said to the membership, and the membership had told us that, and the membership believed it, that there was no point in going back to work in a business where you couldn't earn a living doing what you did. There was no point in that. There was no point in saying we're giving up because giving up meant giving in and saying this is not going to be a job that I can sustain. And by the way, for television writers, 75% of our writers work in episodic television, and changes in that business had made it almost impossible for a large majority of those people to earn a living that was good enough. You know, when people don't understand, you understand, we understand, but the world didn't understand that when you hear what a writer makes, you have to understand they don't make it all the time, that the amount of money they make in a given year has to cover them for the years when they don't work. And it used to be that the good times paid for the bad. Now the good times didn't pay for the bad anymore. The good times were way too brief and paid at too low a rate. The bad times were going on too long. We had lots of writers who were on staff on television shows taking second jobs in order to make ends meet. And so we had the enormous unfortunate advantage of being able to speak to writers and reflect back to them what they had said to us, which is the business is no longer tenable. Either we change it or you will go out of business yourself because you can't be a writer for 20 or 30 years. And we did all kinds of other things. We picketed every single day. In front of every studio, and often in front of productions that were not in Los Angeles until SAG-AFTRA shut everything down. And we did that together, not just because it helped to show the companies how we were feeling, but because, as always, being together made the difference. So we had fun pickets, we had theme pickets, we had Star Wars pickets, we had, meet your old friends on your old show pickets, we had dress up pickets, we had food pickets, we had, we did anything we could do to keep morale up and to say, keep being out there on the line. And we kept sending messages. We kept on writing to members to talk about what was going on, to giving them updates, letting them know where we stood. I put out videos every few weeks saying, this is where we are. You heard one of them. The sort of thing I talk about over and over again. And our members themselves, they're writers, they're really clever. They use social media in a devastating way, not just to take down the companies, but to give each other support through humor mostly and through truth. So every single day we were working together to do that, and we held together. Having said that, it got very difficult toward the end. We never lost our solidarity, but we lost some of our morale, and it was hard. It was hard to do. I'll give you this.
Chris, just explain to them what is a picket. When you're picketing,
you're standing outside. You outside of every place where there's production, every studio office. You walk around in a circle over and over again, holding a sign saying WGA on strike. Well, in this case, people made up all kinds of funny slogans. And the purpose of that, on the one hand, is to force other people to cross your picket line in order to work. In fact, that was hugely important for us because the Teamsters, the people who drive the trucks that take the equipment in and out, many of them refused to cross picket lines. And so what we were able to do by using these pickets was to shut down production all across Hollywood. Even before the actors went on strike, almost all production was shuttered. Because remember, there's still stuff in the pipeline. We stopped writing, but there are shows that are being made and scripts that have already been delivered. So the companies can minimize the pain they're feeling by continuing to produce stuff and think, well, we can live on that for a while. Netflix thought we've got lots of stuff in the can. We can live for a long, long time without making anything, even though it's going to hurt us eventually. So we picket in order to allow the Teamsters to say, we're not crossing your picket line and shut down production. But we picket even more than that to say to each other, I'm still here. You're not sitting alone in your house wondering what's going on and what everyone else is feeling. You can talk to each other. And on these pickets, we met each other in ways that we had never met before. I told Anjum that although the 2007-8 strike and the 2023 strike were incredibly painful, it was also in many ways the most moving experience our writers had ever had. They met the writers they had revered, who had been around forever and wrote the movies and television shows they loved. They met younger writers and heard from them what their stories were. It was an effort, it was a way of mixing and mingling and coming together that centered around not just meetings, but also those pickets. And by the way, one of the things that made us strong in this strike that we had never had before is a young, diverse, intensely politicized, angry in the sense they were sick and tired of the way the world was behaving toward them, membership that gave us strength. And those people mingled with the old-timers who might have been too conservative and taught them a lesson as well. And so we all learned from each other. That's a hugely important thing. You have to, it's like in a family. The way to stay healthy is just keep talking. Just keep talking. Never stop talking. Never stop expressing how you feel. You can say anything you want. We had a captain system that allowed every single member to speak to, in a small group, to a captain who was selected, who could bring back their worries and fears or concerns to the leadership, and through which the leadership could communicate with them. So we're always attentive. We never let that go. Every single day, every member of the board of the Writers Guild West and the Council of the Writers Guild East and the Joint Negotiating Committee were out on the picket lines in New York and Los Angeles, marching side by side with everyone else, like your executive committee would be. Never a day. We had a whole chart where we knew where we needed to be. And the most important thing was to stay in constant contact with our membership and let them know where they were and that they weren't alone.
Absolutely. So there you are. It's hard work. I mean, what they truly, and I mean this, and I'm not saying this merely because Chris is sitting here, but what they won in 2023 was pretty unprecedented. Okay, it's a very, very successful strike, and the next time round, I think the corporations will think 3 times before trying to walk off the negotiation table. But what he's emphasizing is going on strike doesn't mean sitting at home and being passive and watching, some shows. It means being out on the streets. The entire membership, effectively, was out on the streets. The entire executive committee of SWA, I mean, they have, of course, the board, are out on the street. Plus, they had a structure. I was speaking with Michelle Mulrooney, who's the vice president.
Yes.
Vice president of WGA. Okay, if you have a membership of 8,000 active writers, this communication, which she kept emphasizing, was very important. That how are you constantly in touch with them and convincing each one of them? She said, I don't need to speak with 8,000 people. I'm speaking with 200 people. 200 people are the captains. That means from amongst you, like SWA identifies and invites 200 of you to become captains. Those captains identify another 300 people who they will go and speak with. So they are responsible for those 300 people. We are responsible for these 200 people. So, and the grievances from individual members come to the captain. The captain then processes it and passes it on to the leadership. So there is an involvement, actually, of a second rung of leadership, who at some stage obviously will then get into this. So it's a pretty well organized thing. There's a lot that we can learn from that. And that is what kept the strike going, because they were constantly receiving grievances. कि यार कब तक चलेगा यार ये? अभी थोड़ा बहुत तो compromise कर लो. भैया ये जाने दो, वो जाने दो. क्यों अपन अड़े हुए हैं? If you do that, thank you very much. You are actually reinforcing the strength and the arrogance of the corporations. Right. And hence they needed to do that.
So I want to take you through. Now you're in with us on the strike. Here's the history of the strike, right? We're 100 days in. The companies have refused to talk to us. They won't even talk to us. They say they've got to negotiate with the DGA, the Directors Guild, and then SAG-AFTRA. That's a lie, but that's what they're going to do. They say in the press, it comes out, our intention is to starve them out, to make them lose their houses. That's what they said out loud. We want to starve you out and make you lose your houses. They denied it kind of quietly afterward. But still, that's what they were doing. They were trying to inflict as much pain as possible. Now, they did the same thing to SAG-AFTRA, the actors. They miscalculated. They said no to the actors because that's their job. The companies have an organization called the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers who spend every day of the year saying no to labor unions. That's all they do. They just say no. And that's the way they were doing to us and waiting for us to cave. So we're 100 days in. We've been striking for over 3 months. It's hot, and there's no end in sight. SAG-AFTRA has joined us for the first time in 62 years, a strike of 2 guilds side by side, a big deal. But we knew it was going to still take the company's time to come to us. So this is what I said to the membership. I said, even as we welcome SAG-AFTRA to our side, we are still responsible for our own deal. And so we remain focused and diligent. We must continue to march, picket sign in hand. But we should also remember this, and with pride, that before there was SAG-AFTRA, before even the Teamsters and IATSE and the laborers and the electrical workers and the musicians and the plasterers came to our side, there was the writers. Alone then, we looked at the blank page and began to imagine the future. With no net but each other, we typed the words, what if? And then we took a step into the darkness and found that it was light. And then we were joined by the crews and the drivers and the actors. The actors got a bit more fanfare when they showed up, but that's okay. We wrote the script. The WGA, still small, not alone anymore. After all these decades, Hollywood labor has finally linked arms and found its voice. and that voice says enough. There is no road to long-term prosperity that burns a path through your own workforce. We are not your enemies. We are not merely a cost to be borne. We are your partners and your greatest asset. And we are, as you acknowledge yourselves, irreplaceable. But by accident or design, and it doesn't really matter anymore, the business you are running no longer works for those who work for you. What is the point in continuing to deny that? Why deny that when everyone else in the business, to a person, tells you it's true? Do you think it's a coincidence that for the first time since Eisenhower was president, you can't exactly accuse us of being quick on the trigger? The effect has a cause. It has a cause. There is no point in insisting on the answers of the past for the questions of the future. But if you want instead to invest in something that will reach you fortunes, I have a tip. And if you are visionaries, envision a solution, not a stalemate. Because this isn't a war we're in, it's a negotiation. It's just a negotiation. There is no face-saving here for either side, because there is no winner or loser. There's just a deal. And when you come to remember that again, we will be here, as we have been here all along. And at this point, with 170,000 writers and actors aligned against your intransigence, that is as generous as I can be, as close to an olive branch as I can offer. But you insist instead on the same threatening rhetoric, on saying you would rather starve us than pay us. I will remind you of this. You are fighting for $1. We are fighting for survival. We are fighting for our home. Writing is where we live, and we will defend that home with a bravery and stamina and ferocity that you will come to understand one day, which is why you cannot break us. You cannot outlast us. You cannot. And not just because we have the will, because we have the power. Nothing happens in this business until we start to write, and we will not start to write until we are paid. Now, I want to point something out so you can see one of the things that's going on here. I'm talking to the writers, but I'm also talking to the companies. And I'm making a switch right there in the rhetoric we're using. That's the moment it happens. Because running a strike is like organizing a war. You have to rev up the troops. You have to make them angry and believe that the only way to fight is to sacrifice. And then you have to turn that off and move toward a peaceful solution. And so in this moment, instead of the rhetoric that says, we're going to beat you, I'm beginning to talk about the idea that we can make a deal here and that you can see a path forward. That's intentional, right? All of this stuff is intentional. Nothing is by accident when it comes to our strike. If you were a student of it, if you watch it, you see that none of us ever used the name of any executive. We never attacked anyone. There were no ad hominem attacks. It was always the companies, so that eventually we could make a deal, because eventually that's what had to happen. We're not in this to strike, we're in this to end the strike. And the people we're opposed to have to eventually find a way to save face and sit down with us and do the same thing. It's a lot more detail than that, but that's a critical moment in it. And it just shows you, I think it's part of this whole thing we're talking about. It's just emphasizing again and again, preparation, communication. That's it.
One thing I think is absolutely clear, Zama. When we go on strike, Chris is going to write our speeches. Okay, yeah. That is now you cannot escape that. After this kind of fiery, inspiring speech that you have read out to us.
Yes, you
wonder.
Back me into a corner. I have no choice.
Yeah, absolutely, you have no choice. But I also have to tell you, right before we go on, that there is this organization, some of you may be aware of that. It's an international federation. It's called the International Affiliation of Writers Guilds. So since 2011, India has been represented there. SWA has been represented there, and several of us have gone. There's Mitesh, of course, who is one of our leading voices at the IWG AGMs. Zama Habib is there, I'm there, so the three of us have been involved. And this is a solidarity group where all the important guilds of the world are affiliated to this federation. So in that sense, by our affiliation there, we already are in solidarity with each other. And if at all we have to take any kind of precipitate action, we do have these sister organizations standing with us on that, expressing our support. इनकी जब strike चल रही थी, so May में शुरू हुई. And then on June 14, one of the methods that they felt, or one of the actions they felt, which would really boost the energy of the strike, was to have an international strike. So on that day, June 14th, they had written to all of us saying, could you also lead a demonstration in any of these locations against any of these companies? So in Bombay, we chose Netflix. And we stood outside Netflix office at Bandra Kurla complex. And so did all the other guilds in their own cities. It was tremendous. And when the press came out and the whole report came out, just the photographs which were there. So हम लोग भी जाके खड़े हो गए थे, SWA, protesting in solidarity with the WGS strike. Likewise, I'm saying such actions and other actions we can expect to have solidarity and support from the voices of these individual guilds, including the Writers Guild of America. And this successful strike has a ripple effect on us, because if they manage to do it and they're standing with us, well, there's a good chance that we can also push ahead.
Right. We were incredibly appreciative of that. And the relationship between the American Guild and the Indian Guild is long and powerful and very meaningful to us. There's a little contradiction here in this, but it's not really a contradiction. One of the things that we told the writers, which is true all the way through, you heard an echo of it in that last little address, is that the only thing that matters is our own solidarity. We could do this without anyone else supporting us. The public could be against us. No other guild could be in favor of us. The world could ignore us. They could, whatever they want, doesn't matter. If we hold together, we win, because we're the ones who got to write this stuff. And that's true. And we've always had to convince ourselves of that, because in the history of the Writers Guild, we have almost always been alone in standing up against the companies amongst the guilds and unions in the United States. Having said that, it is impossible to underestimate, to overestimate the power of everyone's support when it came. When everyone marched on June 14th around the world, you can bet that in the guild, the board and council, and at the negotiating committee, and in writers small groups all over the place, everyone was watching those videos. It gives you so much strength to know that we're all aligned. Not just that the companies can't use us against each other, but in fact that the struggle of writers is a universal struggle. The struggle against censorship, the struggle for credit, the struggle for proper compensation, the struggle to be given the dignity that our work demands. That's a universal struggle. We're all connected in that way. And when you said that, you and all the other guilds, it gave us the energy to keep going. It was right in the middle of the strike. We had been striking for 45 days. It was no small thing. So thank you for that. But I'm telling you, and we, all the guilds and unions would do the same for each other. We will do the same for each other. No one is alone in this.
Absolutely, absolutely, no doubt. Yeah, but what is important also for SWA also to acknowledge that yes, support should come, and it's very desirable, and we expect it would come, even from the other Indian unions. But the final position has to be like, with you, without you, in spite of you, we will still go ahead with this. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to draw you to one particular issue. You said that there was a 2-year protest or 2-year action against the agents. Now I know that there are agencies here. I can see some of them sitting here, and I think they'd like to know what it is that it was about, because there was some kind of voices, resentment which certain clients had expressed about this conflict of interest. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure.
On this conflict
Sure.
of interest?
By the way,
By agencies, I mean talent agencies, script agents, agencies which represent us.
This is true of the major agencies in particular, not necessarily all the smaller agencies. And what I'm going to talk about went along alongside the fact that writers had very wonderful relationships with their individual agents. But the big agencies had been done to do 2 things that were unacceptable. The first of those was that some of them began to create their own production companies, which meant that they wanted to both represent us and employ us at the same time. They wanted to put pressure on their own costs by keeping the price of writing down at the same time as they were making arguments about how they would support us. That is a fundamental conflict of interest. It had been attempted one time before in the 1960s by Lew Wasserman, and then the government, this Justice Department, which was led by Robert Kennedy at that point, fought it and forced Universal, which was then affiliated with one of the largest agencies, to divest itself of the agency. They had to separate. But we don't live in a world in which the Justice Department was going to be able to do that anymore, and so we had to do it ourselves. The second thing, and the thing that's been going on for a very long time, is that agents were beginning to charge packaging fees. What that came out of was a belief on the part of some agents early on that they brought a bunch of clients together to make one project. Like they brought an actor and a director and a writer together. Instead of merely charging 10% for each of us, they should be able to charge a larger fee for having put the thing together. It's a questionable thing as it is, because they get 10% no matter what. But now the agencies were beginning to demand packaging fees even if they did nothing, even if they were the only client on a show. And essentially, and they would, by the way, in exchange for that, waive you having to pay your commission. So I would sell a show to Netflix, for example, and I would not ask my agency to bring anyone else on. And the agency would make a separate deal with Netflix to pay them an amount of money per episode, plus a percentage of the back end for bringing me on. For which they had done nothing but the job that they had done for me to pay them 10%. And they said, well, in exchange for that, you don't need to pay commission. I think somebody once said very wisely, if you want to know who you're working for, find out who's paying you, right? And so the agencies were no longer being paid by the writers, they were being paid by the companies. And that was an enormous conflict of interest, because as the agency became richer and richer, and they became fabulously rich, writers became poorer and poorer. Writer income plummeted about 50% during the period of time in which packaging was okay. Why? Because the agents no longer had to worry about what our fees were. So when the companies came back to them and said, this is the money, take it or leave it, the agencies had no issue saying, okay, we'll go to our clients and say, take it or leave it. Why? Because I'm being paid by the companies anyway. I'm doing fine. My success is not dependent on your success. It got so bad that at that point, with writer income plummeting and agencies continuing to exhibit that conflict, that we eventually said, we're going to suspend the agency agreement, and every single writer is going to fire their agents until all of them agree to end packaging and to end their affiliated production companies, and that's what they did. So that's the story. That was a harder battle to win in some ways than this.
2
That
years.
was more 2 years against our friends, right? You know, it's one thing to say we're battling the companies over a negotiation that happens every 3 years. Everyone understands that. To say you have to fire the only person you think believes in you in the business, your friend in the business, that was really hard. That shows you how brave writers are.
You want to just tell us about what your agency told you after the strike was over?
Oh, yeah, they said, don't come back. Yeah. Yeah, when I say to you that there was no that people didn't take the strike personally, that was not true of the agencies. They took that very personally often. But now, I mean, I work with agents at CAA and WME on projects, and so we've gotten somewhat beyond it. But it doesn't matter. I mean, my feeling was, I don't, as I said this to you, and all of this is, I don't care. At some point, if you don't stand up for yourself, no one else is going to. If you don't do what's right, no one's going to. You shouldn't do it foolishly. You shouldn't throw things away for no reason. But every once in a while, you get to a crossroads where the world is untenable, and you have to say no. You just have to say no and say, I'm willing to take the consequences of that. Now, I admit that I was older and able to do that, and other people took some different kinds of risks, but that was what I was willing to do. I just said, you can do what you want to me. I'm not going to let this continue. When I say me, that gets multiplied by 8,000 people doing the exact same thing.
You know, there's an old cliche, knowledge is power. It's essentially about being aware and being vigilant about where is it that your rights are being eroded. And you don't even realize it. It happens so gradually. Like he says, your agent might be your friend, getting you work, and you're very beholden to that person, and rightly so, because they also do a wonderful job of making things easy for us, of facilitating our careers, absolutely. And yet, if they are the ones who actually begin to get paid by the companies, then they are not going to really stand up for you, because they are more interested in the payment that the company gives and to keep them happy. Likewise, if they start cuddling up with the senior writers, then they will shortchange the junior writer by giving the same argument that नहीं आपका टाइम आएगा तो आपको भी मिल जाएगा ये सब. फिलहाल भैया ये नाम है, नामी ग्रामी राइटर है, आप जूनियर क्रेडिट ले लो. In terms of agencies becoming producers, I have seen the contracts. And I can't name the agencies, of course, but I have seen the contracts of agencies in India who have become producers, and they are no different from what the companies are offering. And when the client objected, saying that SWA had discussed with you that this is not acceptable to us, what was their answer? SWA has no jurisdiction. That SWA has no jurisdiction is exactly what producers were saying earlier. Now they're coming to the negotiation table because they do realize that there seems to be a large contingent of working writers who stand behind this position of SWA. And that becomes very important because those large body of writers are now aware. And therefore, it's important, I think, Zama, we need to keep in mind this, the frequent and regular communication that we also need to now initiate to ensure that everybody is kept aware of what it is that the rights are and what is it that what collective action is required.
Can I do something now before our time's up? And
Are you going to read another speech to me?
Yeah, I'm just going to give you another speech. Well, I'm going to say something.
Because now, soon I'll have a strike declaration here.
I hope so.
Okay, at this rate.
This is about, it's sort of, I guess we're probably coming close to the end of this. I want to say a couple of things. First of all, one of the keys to all of this is a line that I love. It's from Virgil. And it applies to us and maybe to you and to anything else, which is this. They can because they think they can. And that is the truth. That's what it takes. It takes a belief in yourself. I want to read you what I said to the membership when the strike was over, in part just to talk to you about what it means for you to be a part of your own guild and how proud you should be of that. There were writers at the end of the strike who stood up in meetings and said, I've had a 30-year career. There's not a single show I've written that I was as proud of as what we did this year. There's nothing that meant more to me than being part of this union and actually standing up for each other. And that's what I sort of talked about at the end. And to whatever extent I convey that to you and say, if you can feel that feeling, not just when you strike, but just by being part of the group, then you've come a long way. I said this. I said, unions are not perfect things. But in the history of social and economic justice in this country, they have been among the most powerful forces for transformative good. And the pressures and the perils that now face working people are owed in large measure to the decline of unions. We are part of a reversal of that trend. Not just a part, we are the front line. Unions across this country have looked to us as a sign of hope, and we have given them hope. It is not an exaggeration to say that we have turned on a light. And not just for unions, for ordinary working people too. Everyone feels alone these days and powerless and meaningless against vast forces. But we were not alone. We were a community with an unshakable, unbreakable mutual bond, the tiniest of unions against the largest of corporations, and all we had was each other. And what turns out is a very simple philosophy with earth-shattering power. I am here for you. You are here for me. We are doing what we're doing mostly for people we will never meet. And nothing will break our promise to them or to each other. And all of this in the belief that we matter, that the fact of us is not irrelevant, that we have a purpose and a place, and that we deserve to be accounted for. We who tell stories were, in this case, our own story, and it turns out to have been a deeply resonant one. As for us, what we have done to protect our profession now and in the future is embodied on our new contract. What we have shared, what this time has meant for us beyond that, is just ours. Wits and Weddings, the Philip Larkin poem, is one of my favorites, particularly this line. Few thought of the others they would never meet, or how their lives would all contain this hour. Our lives have now all contained this hour, this fight, this struggle, this pain, these wins, these friends, this bond. We can put the picket signs down now. We can stop walking. We can go back to work. When we started this, I talked about the debt we owed to those who came before us, the writers of 1960 and 2007 and 8. We have paid back that debt. We have done our part as best we knew how. Whether we'll need to do it again someday, I don't know. Perhaps 60 years from now, someone we never meet will make reference to us and exhort a new generation of writers to do their part. That is how the story continues and survives. In a world that bends too easily to power and wealth, that cares too little about fairness and the dignity of every individual person, that favors selfishness over community, the Writers Guild is something of a miracle. And we are the Writers Guild, and we have done it again. So that's
Telling you there's
what-
going to be a strike call here.
Yeah, that's just what it
You
means.
have to stay back and just march on the picket lines with us. Okay, yeah, you're
I'm
not
there.
going
I'm
anywhere,
there.
Chris.
That's what it means to be part of something, to be part of
Yes.
a union, to be part of a labor organization. That's how meaningful it is.
Okay. Chris, we have 20 minutes.
Okay.
And some questions have come in.
sorry.
And this is something that I was going to come to anyway, the elephant in the room, artificial intelligence. Okay, you people fought for that. And it's been 2 years almost, not 2 years, but whatever, almost 2 years since then. Things have grown, things have developed. You want to just educate us about what you feel are the implications, or whether the dangers, if one can call it that, of this ballooning phenomenon called AI.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this, so I'll admit
Doesn't
that.
matter, but you tell us basics.
I'm here. I'm the only one you got here, right? So, I'll say first what we did, right? When we looked at artificial intelligence, we did a couple of different things. Companies wouldn't talk to us about it for a long time, but it ended up not being the most difficult thing to resolve with them, except for some legal language. Here's one of the reasons, I think. We had always assumed that AI would not be an issue between us and the companies because we shared a common interest. They hold the copyright. You may know that. In the United States, we don't own the copyright to what we do. The companies own the copyright. And at this point,
in Hollywood, all the writers' contracts are work for hire. So they don't have this thing about assignment of rights, that I'm the first owner. And they don't mind that at all because their minimum basic agreement takes care of all the rights which otherwise would have flowed from the copyright laws.
right. So it's actually worked out very well for us from an economic point of view doing that. But in any case, it meant that when we write something, the companies own the copyright, and that the courts won't recognize a copyright for AI-generated material. And the only thing the companies have of value is the copyright and the stuff that we make. So it was our assumption that the companies would be absolutely willing to restrict the use of AI to protect themselves. God knows Disney doesn't want everyone to be, Disney once sued an elementary school for putting a picture of Mickey Mouse on a wall. They're not the kind of company that wants people taking their material and doing whatever they want with it willy-nilly. The companies didn't come to the table to talk to us, and that made us very afraid. One of the reasons they claimed was because they had lots of uses of AI that were not creative, that they wanted to be able to do with their own workforce and workflow, and that may well be true. In the end, in this particular negotiation, we protected our credit and our compensation and our contractual rights and all of our own material, which we felt was sufficient with the companies with whom we had our contractual relationship. So without getting into detail, it means that AI couldn't be credited with a script, and AI couldn't write us or be rewritten by us. None of those things were allowed to happen. We protected ourselves in all of those ways. In addition, we began to look at the question of what happens when companies use our material, their copyright material, to train their AI systems. And knowing that we did not yet know what instances of that would be about, and knowing that eventually that was really just about compensation, we sort of put a pin in that and said, you retain all your copyright rights, we retain all our contractual rights, and we will figure out how you will compensate us for using our material to train your AI when the time comes. That's one thing. Second thing is this. We're even more scared of the companies with whom we do not have a contractual relationship. OpenAI and Google and all those places. We have no way of negotiating with them. And if they begin to use this material for purposes of creating content, that's a completely different story. And you may have heard in the news that there was a company that was using subtitles or whatever it was in movies to begin to to download whole scripts into AI. And we have, up till this point, called upon the companies to take legal action against those other companies, and they have not yet done that. And I don't know why that's true. I cannot tell you why it's the case. I think this is all very risky. If I have to look into the future and I have no way of knowing, I don't know that AI replaces writers altogether, but I think there's a very great risk that it makes writing more efficient and reduces the number of writers that are necessary. We actually described the AI as part of the issue we had in episodic television in saying you still need somebody who's really smart to figure out what's needed and to input stuff, but you don't need a whole writer's room if AI is churning out lots and lots of drafts of outlines and things like that. So I think there's a very great risk of that. There's a risk of that. There's a risk that a part of the business will be taken up by people who make content for, at somebody's request. Like, I'd like a movie using AI with me as the hero, set in Japan in the 1980s, and it's a romantic comedy, and somebody can go make that for you. And they may not be as good as what we write, but they'll be part of the industry. That'll be another thing that distracts people. But there's also another fear that I have, the greatest fear, and I don't know if this is going to happen, which is if the courts are not consistent in saying that AI is not will not be protected, if they begin to allow companies to use those, and if AI gets so good that it can write stuff like we write, it maybe not quite as well, but awfully well, then I think we got some trouble, because then I think the contracts we make won't really matter. Companies can come back and say, we don't care what you contracted for 3 years ago. In this contract, we're allowed to use AI, and go out on strike. Who cares? I've got a machine that's going to write what you write. So there's a real risk there. There's a real risk for us. And the future is very unclear, and we have to be very aware of it. As I said, I'm not the expert here. I think all of these things will come into play. We'll have to deal with the companies with whom we have contractual relationships. We'll have to hope that the courts play their part. We have to hope that the world still values what's written by human beings, and that although there may be some interest in the first book that's written entirely by AI or movies, that it won't ever get quite good enough, that it's more than a niche in the market. But I don't know. I'm not sure. And look, I mean, I think there's no way to stand in the way in general of technology. We didn't stop cars from replacing horse-drawn carriages in our country, and we're not going to. We didn't stop automated toll booths from replacing toll booth operators, and we didn't stop cell phones from replacing telephone operators. All those things happened, and people got retrained, and that's going to happen in businesses all across the country. It's very risky for labor as it exists now, and it's going to mean a lot of retraining, but also maybe progress in some ways. I don't know. I am nervous about the fact that the companies who own AI don't feel any of the ethical obligations. Somebody once said to me that when we're afraid of science fiction, what we're really afraid of is capitalism. And I think there's some truth in that. I think what we're afraid of here is the unhinged, unbounded quest for billions and trillions without a consideration for what it means for the rest of the world. We may be victims of that. We're just going to have to keep our eye on it. And you're going to then have to bring somebody here who knows a lot more than I do, because I'm an amateur when it comes to this. I'm just a writer who ran a negotiation. I'm not an expert in this. We had experts who talked to us about it, but even then, who knows? I mean, people who, I'm sure you know as much about this as I do, many of you. The people who I talk to in the industry say what you see is going on is only the tip of the iceberg, and what AI can really do is so much beyond that already. You have no idea how far it's gotten, and it's going to keep going until there'll be no real way to distinguish between what humans can do and what machines can do.
In the negotiations that you did, Chris,
Yeah.
You managed to wrest some rights and control over how your work was used.
Yeah.
You want to just re-summarize that, please? Just
Oh, I mean, that's what I talked about. I said we protected credits. AI can't get credit. We protected compensation. It can't affect our compensation. It's not allowed to rewrite us. We can't be forced to either rewrite AI or be rewritten by AI. All of those things are under writer control at this point. All of our separated rights, our contractual rights, the additional contractual rewrites we have in our work are all protected. AI can't undermine any of those things in the Writers Guild contract as it exists right now with the companies with whom we have a contractual relationship. And that's, I think, going to provide us some measure of protection over the short-term future. But as I said, if the copyright issue, which ought to constrain the companies, does not continue to constrain them, and if AI becomes incredibly powerful and extraordinarily good at doing our jobs, then we've got a problem.
You also won the right to transparency, that if the company is giving you a script to rewrite, then they have to declare to you whether artificial intelligence was used.
That's right.
For that. Also, you won the other very important right that if your script is going to be used for training, generative AI, is that what it's called? Yeah. Then in which case you have to be informed about that.
Yes, but I said, but the most important thing there is we have not yet figured out the compensation for that. I mean, we're not, here's the thing. We can't stop the companies from using that stuff, right? If for no other reason than, for example, even though the script may be one thing, they own the film, right? So they can use the film to train, the actual film to train large language models. So we can't stop it. All we can do is set the proper compensation for our use. When I say that, by the way, almost certainly it means the input of thousands and thousands of scripts. And so we're not talking about individual writers saying, pay me a certain amount of money. It's a way of coming up with a system that says this is how writers in general are compensated broadly for the use of their material to train AI, even still with the restrictions that AI cannot then go off and write a film by itself. We haven't dealt with that yet. We put a pin in that and said we will come to it when the situation arises. It was not possible for us or the companies to understand exactly where that was going to happen, and so we were okay with saying some things we'll learn more about, and we'll let that be a problem for the future.
See, there are 3 more questions which I'm afraid, unfortunately, are not directly relevant to Chris. Because things that he spoke about, let me just touch upon one and tell you like this. How can new writers negotiate the dilemma of taking up a new job and simultaneously fighting for their rights? Obviously, the vulnerability that you're talking about is that if you demand your basic rights and if you're denied that job, then how do you resolve that question? Now, there are 2 aspects to it. Number 1 is if you believe that that's your right and that your dignity is being snatched by you not being given your due, like say credit or at least a dignified fee, but you are desperate for that job without the assurance of credit, it is going to harm your career in the future. Because the most important thing, and I think one of the first protests, from what I understood from Carl Gottlieb, is this his name? The one who wrote Jaws?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So long ago, 10 years ago, a discussion with him, where he said one of the first issues that the WGA threatened to strike was on credits. Because they realized more than remuneration, it is credits, because credits ensures your career, ensures your future, and if there's going to be residuals there and here royalties, then it's going to be based on credits. So if you let that go, even if you're a new writer, and you let that go, you're getting rid of royalties worth 100 years, for 100 years. Because that is what the law says. That 60 years after your death, you continue, until 60 years after your death, you continue to receive royalties. That means your family, your children, your heirs. And maybe you'll have another 40, 50 years to live, I imagine. Which means more than 100 years of royalty every time your work is released on television, and the other writer who's been credited unfairly is getting all the royalties. So you have to be aware that certain basic rights you cannot let go of. And I would put credit on top. You let go of that just because of this, anxiety that, I'm getting a job at least, That excitement is going to cost you very, very dearly. Then somebody is asking that if in this highly competitive environment, how can we maintain a sense of solidarity with our fellow writers in such a high, This again, collective action, that if all of us are unified on a particular point, that no writer is going to agree to such an unfair clause in an agreement, then in which case then the producer has no choice but to reform that clause. But if you believe that somebody else will take it up, then obviously we're in trouble, because right now we haven't reached the stage where we can declare a strike. So it'll have to be. Anyway, this is all part of the awareness campaign that I was referring to. About royalty, anyway, he has nothing to do with that. I'll tell you what, Mitesh, if there is time, if you can carve out some time, even if it is an early morning session, let's say 9 to 9:30, or a late evening session if we can get time here, let some of these basic questions that are coming from new writers be addressed at that time. Some people from SWA can sit here and quickly give those answers. Okay? You don't have to do it here right now. Okay, Chris. Before we close this extremely valuable session, some last words for our membership here, and how would you encourage them to be conscious of their rights, to stand up, to how do they contribute to strengthening the union, and some words of advice for this front row sitting here, the eminent leadership of SWA.
Well, I guess my message would both be in the negative and the positive. if we allow ourselves to be treated any way, if we say, I'll take any job at any price, under any conditions, we make it impossible for the community itself to survive. Obviously, it's always a race to the bottom at that point. I can't speak to any given writer about what their balance is between the extent to which they need a given job and they're willing to accept certain terms. I can only say what I said, which is, if you're willing to say, I'll take a penny less than the person who you paid before, and the next person says, I'll take a penny less than that, eventually everyone's going to be paid nothing. And if you say, I don't need to be credited, I don't need to be provided with the dignity that my work deserves, then eventually nobody will get that. The writers with all of the experience who've been treated one way for a while will eventually move out of the business, and the business will treat us all less well. And there's a move in that direction. The tech companies in particular, Netflix, for example, they don't have the same, it's hard to believe they can have less respect for what we do than what happened before, but they have less respect for what we do than what happened before. They're not in the business of making art or even entertainment. They're just in the business of making a dollar. And so they will do whatever they can do, and they have in market after market, to gain their own marginal advantage. And we have to find some way of saying enough. Because if we don't say enough eventually, if everyone says, I'm on my own and I'm willing to take whatever I'm given, then none of us have a chance. On the other hand, if we stand together, if we believe actually that our work has value, which it does, if we believe that nothing happens without writing, and I'm not the only person even on this stage to say that, because that's the truth, then eventually, even though it's going to take a long time and there are going to be ups and downs, and I don't say in any way that your path is going to be the same as our path, eventually we make progress. Eventually we see a world that's better than the world that we inherited. And that's the point of unions. I've often talked to people, and other people have said to me that, and I mentioned this, in a very, very difficult competitive world where democracy works imperfectly, unions are one of the best ways for a single human being to feel as if they have power and purpose and meaning. There's nothing better than that. And democracy is a kind of muscle. If you don't use it, it begins to atrophy and you don't use it again. And so even in our country, for example, where things are very, very difficult, and I'm not going to talk about them in particular, very difficult, and you have doubts about everything that we once thought was steady, we realize that nothing will be kept without a fight. Nothing is earned without a struggle. And in unions, at least, amongst a small group of people who share the love for what we do and our values, we can find a way through of all of that to begin to find our own power. And I think it's not going to be easy. It's harder for you than it was for us. I understand that, because of the way the law works and because of, in fact, the little gift of us giving up our copyright, which means that we were allowed to collectively bargain. But I would suggest to you it is the way forward, and the thing that in some ways you're going to end up being proudest of. You and I, Anjum, talked about this with young writers the other day, that in the end the list of your credits is one thing, but the other thing is the people you've met and the people you've affected and the things you've stood for. That's easy to say, but it's also, I think, somewhat true. That I am, like the writer I talked about, as proud of what I've done in the Guild as anything I've written. And I continue to be that way. And I think if anything lasts in the long run, it will not be what I wrote, because television in general is a transitory medium and people don't remember it forever. Movies sometimes last, but you never know. But what does last is the passing on of the belief that we matter from one generation to the next. So that's what I would commend to you, to the extent that you can, to celebrate the fact that you're part of a community, to interact with your leadership. And to the leadership, I would say, it's a calling that is deeply meaningful, and it takes a lot of effort, and it sometimes distracts from your work, but there's nothing that matters more. And keep in touch with your membership, and don't let there be a gap between you and the people you represent. And if you do that, then you'll walk side by side, and there'll be other guilds and unions around the world that'll walk side by side with you. And that's my message.
I want the convener to acknowledge that I have closed the session at exactly the second that you had asked me to, 12 noon. Okay? Right. So, Chris, once again, deep sense of gratitude, personally as well as on behalf of the entire crowd which is here eagerly, okay, which was waiting to hear you, and of course the leadership in the front row. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming all the way.
I would request at this moment our veteran screenwriter and former president of SWA, Mr. Robin Budd, to come to the stage and present a thank you gift.